The airport was buzzing with the usual crowd. People rushing for flights, luggage wheels rolling across shiny floors, announcements echoing overhead. Travelers scurried along, dragging bags, checking screens, murmuring directions to each other. And then, out of nowhere, a commotion broke the ordinary rhythm. A security officer, tall and stern, grabbed Steven Seagal by the throat. Not aggressively enough to make anyone panic yet, but firm, commanding, and completely unexpected. Whispers ran like electricity through the nearby crowd. People froze mid-step. Phones popped up instinctively, recording the strange scene. Faces twisted between confusion, fear, and curiosity. Seagal, however, didn't flinch. Not a twitch. Not a glance of panic. His calm gaze met the officer's, steady and unbothered, like he already knew exactly how this would end. For a split second it looked like he might even smile, but it was subtle, almost imperceptible. Something about the way he held himself made people stop and wonder, who really had control here? "Why isn't he reacting?" muttered one of the onlookers. A group of business travelers nearby exchanged glances, unsure if they should intervene, call security, or just keep filming. The officer tightened his grip slightly, testing. A ripple of tension moved through the spectators. Luggage trolleys were abandoned mid-path. Someone's coffee trembled in their cup. Seagal's presence was calm, yet commanding. There was no shouting, no dramatic gestures, nothing exaggerated. But every small movement, the tilt of his head, the way his shoulders remained relaxed, the way his eyes scanned the crowd, screamed authority. It was the kind of calm that made people instinctively pay attention, the kind that whispered, "Do not underestimate me." Phones kept recording. The murmurs grew. A few people leaned closer to get a better view, while others took a cautious step back. "Wait, is he really just standing there?" someone whispered. Another voice echoed, quieter. "He doesn't look like a regular passenger." Time seemed to slow. Every tick of the airport clock stretched. The tension in the air was palpable, electric. The officer's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the whole scene felt like it could explode. But then again, something about Seagal's calm smile made it clear. This was far from ordinary. And just like that, everyone in the area knew there was more to this man than met the eye. The question on every lip, what happens next? Wait till you see what happens at the end. The airport lounge, normally bustling with muted chatter and rolling suitcases, suddenly felt smaller, tighter, as if the air itself had thickened. Travelers paused mid-stride, their faces registering curiosity, confusion, or outright concern. People on their phones stopped scrolling, their attention drawn by the unfolding drama. Luggage trolleys sat abandoned. A woman's scarf fluttered as she hesitated on the steps of the moving walkway. Seagal stood calm, almost statuesque, in the middle of the terminal corridor. His long coat brushed lightly against the polished floor with each subtle shift of his weight. He didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch, didn't step back. The contrast between his serenity and the officer's tense posture was startling, like watching a storm approach a mountain that refuses to bend. The security officer, whose authority had been unquestioned moments before, seemed to falter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and used to people obeying without question. But something about Seagal's steady gaze made him pause. The terminal lights reflected off his polished badge, highlighting the tension in his fingers as they gripped Seagal's collar. He cleared his throat, unsure if words would help, unsure if anyone around him could really grasp what was happening. Around them, the scene felt suspended in a strange, uneasy quiet. People nearby shifted uneasily, instinctively forming a wide circle to give space without drawing attention to themselves. A couple of children peered from behind their mother's legs. Business travelers straightened, adjusting ties and scarves, as if positioning themselves to witness a moment that might be remembered later. A lone janitor paused with a mop in midair, frozen like a statue, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. The hum of the airport's overhead announcements continued, a surreal background to this unusual tableau. The mechanical rumble of escalators and distant engine roars of luggage carts seemed to fade into insignificance compared to the tension between the officer and Seagal. Passengers whispered among themselves, voices low, fragmented, hesitant. "Who is he? Doesn't look like a regular traveler. Wait, is he?" Every whispered sentence added to the slow-building suspense. Seagal's movements were minimal yet deliberate. His gaze swept the crowd in a slow, measured arc, acknowledging the presence of onlookers without breaking his focus. His hands rested lightly at his sides, relaxed but ready, like a predator surveying its surroundings without haste. There was no theatrics, no exaggerated gestures, just a calm authority that seemed to ripple outward, subtly commanding attention and respect. Even the airport staff could not look away. One security guard leaned against a counter, arms crossed, eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. Another held a scanner loosely in one hand, as if torn between protocol and instinct. The tension spread like a quiet contagion. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting for a signal, a hint, or a move that might explain the unusual encounter. Seagal's presence seemed to slow time itself. The subtle sway of his coat, the almost imperceptible tilt of his head, even the way he shifted weight from one foot to the other, all of it was hypnotic in its calm. In contrast, the officer's hands twitched and his jaw tightened. He shifted slightly, testing, measuring, trying to assert control, but the balance of power in the room felt strangely, undeniably tilted. Phones recorded discreetly. Faces turned, eyes widening with anticipation. People whispered among themselves, some leaning forward for a better view, others retreating just enough to maintain distance. There was an unspoken understanding that everyone was witnessing a moment unlike any ordinary airport confrontation. A moment that demanded attention, yet resisted immediate comprehension. And then, as Seagal's gaze met the officer's one more time, the subtle electric tension in the air hinted at the unspoken question. Who really held control here? Who would move first? And what would happen next? Time seemed to stretch in the terminal as the seconds ticked by, each one heavier than the last. The subtle tension between Steven Seagal and the officer had transformed the ordinary airport lounge into a quiet theater of anticipation. People stopped moving entirely, their feet frozen mid-step, their luggage paused as if the moment demanded it. Even the constant hum of the escalators felt distant, fading into the background of what was now the only sound that mattered, the silent standoff. The officer shifted his weight slightly, testing Seagal's patience, or perhaps his own. His hands flexed against the collar, then relaxed, then flexed again, each micro-movement betraying a growing uncertainty. For the first time, the authority that came with his uniform felt fragile. Around him, spectators whispered in fragmented sentences. Is he just standing there? Does he even notice? No one moves. What's happening? Even the cafe workers nearby had paused mid-pour, coffee cups trembling in their hands. A young mother clutched her child closer, wide-eyed, while a businessman, briefcase half open, leaned subtly to get a better view without drawing attention. It wasn't just curiosity, it was awe, confusion, a shared instinct that something extraordinary was unfolding before them. Seagal, on the other hand, remained perfectly composed. He didn't flinch. He didn't tighten his fists. His gaze swept across the crowd calmly, acknowledging their presence without speaking. Each measured movement, the subtle shift of his shoulders, the tilt of his head, the slow, deliberate adjustment of his coat, seemed to communicate an unspoken message. Nothing here will surprise me. Nothing will shake me. The officer's confidence faltered as he realized this wasn't a typical confrontation. He flexed his arms slightly as if to test both his own strength and Seagal's reaction. His friends or colleagues standing nearby chuckled nervously, trying to mask their own unease. Some leaned in closer, intrigued. Others edged backward, unsure of what they should do next. Every small action, the twitch of an eyebrow, a faint swallow, a barely audible inhale, added to the weight of the moment. Why isn't he nervous? Someone whispered, a young man near the boarding gate. No one answered. Everyone was holding their breath. A few smartphones discreetly recorded, their lenses capturing the faint shimmer of Seagal's calm expression and the growing tension etched across the officer's face. There was no shouting, no dramatic outburst. Yet, somehow, the silence had become almost unbearable, each second stretching like an elastic thread ready to snap. A waitress, balancing a tray of drinks, froze mid-step. She glanced from Seagal to the officer, then to the surrounding crowd as though silently asking herself, do I intervene or just watch? The answer was clear. She remained frozen, a part of the spectacle, one more observer in a scene that had taken over the airport lounge entirely. Even strangers exchanged glances, unspoken questions passing between them. Everyone instinctively knew to watch closely, to notice the micro-moments, the subtle shift in weight, the slight narrowing of eyes, the way a shoulder twitched ever so slightly under pressure. The energy was electric, but it was quiet. Real. Unforgiving in its suspense. Seagal's calm dominance was almost hypnotic. The officer's eyes flicked from Seagal's hands to his eyes and back again. Every tiny movement from Seagal, the gentle exhale, the slight adjustment of his stance, magnified the uncertainty in the officer's mind. Who really controlled this moment? Who had the upper hand? And just when it felt like time could stretch indefinitely, A few onlookers whispered among themselves, barely audible. Nobody expected what happens next. The words floated through the tense air, a promise and a warning, setting every viewer's pulse racing. And still, Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply waited. The terminal felt almost frozen. Every step, every movement seemed slower, as though time itself had been drawn into the silent standoff. Travelers who had been hurrying to gates now stopped completely, captivated by the scene unfolding before them. Phones emerged, raised carefully, capturing every detail. The officer's tense grip, Steven Seagal's calm stance, the almost imperceptible twitch of an eyebrow, the faint tilt of his head. Seagal's presence commanded attention without demanding it. There was no shouting, no exaggerated gestures, no dramatics, just the quiet certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Around him, the crowd's curiosity shifted into a shared, unspoken understanding. They were witnessing something extraordinary. A young woman near the seating area pressed her phone to her chest, hesitating, then cautiously aimed it toward the scene. Her friend whispered, "Do you think he's a special agent or something?" Their voices were low, blending into the soft hum of the airport, but each word added to the collective speculation. Other travelers exchanged looks, silently agreeing. This was unlike anything they had seen in a busy terminal before. Even those not recording were drawn in. A man sipping tea at a nearby cafe froze mid-sip, the liquid hovering in his cup as his gaze remained fixed on Seagal. A group of teenagers, backpacks slung low, nudged one another quietly, pointing without speaking. Each small gesture, the widening of eyes, the slight lean forward, the subtle tightening of hands, built a network of tension that spread throughout the lounge. Phones recorded, but it wasn't just technology capturing the moment. Everyone was watching, in a way that made the ordinary act of observation feel sacred. The atmosphere was electric yet quiet, tense yet controlled. There was a mutual understanding. No one could look away because looking away would be to miss something impossible to describe. The officer's posture shifted subtly. His grip on Seagal's collar was firmer now, testing limits, but even he couldn't ignore the weight of dozens of eyes fixed on him. The crowd's attention was not just passive, they were participants in the scene. Each subtle reaction, each whispered observation, seemed to amplify the tension. It was as if the collective expectation of everyone present had become a tangible force pressing down on the pair in the middle of the terminal. Seagal remained unmoved, his calm the anchor that held the entire scene together. The glint of his eyes caught a reflection in the polished floor, scanning the crowd, acknowledging their presence without a word. He didn't need to speak. Every person watching felt the message. Nothing was about to happen unless he allowed it. The social proof was undeniable. Phones lined up like miniature windows into the moment, recording from every angle. People stopped what they were doing entirely. Luggage sat abandoned mid-aisle. A barista paused with a tray of pastries, mid-step, balancing delicately in the corridor, her focus completely captured by the quiet intensity before her. Passengers whispered to one another, barely audible, yet each word added weight. Look at him, just standing there. He's not scared at all. Why isn't anyone stopping him? Is he testing the officer? Even the security staff, trained to maintain control, found themselves drawn in. One guard leaned lightly against a counter, arms crossed, eyes narrowing as he evaluated the scene. Another raised a radio slowly, then put it down again, unsure whether intervention was necessary, or if it might escalate matters unnecessarily. Everyone, it seemed, had become part of the audience, and every audience member felt the unspoken pull of anticipation. Seagal shifted slightly, just enough to be noticed, and the room's energy rippled. People instinctively leaned forward, phones raised. Each subtle change, the way his coat brushed the floor, the tilt of his shoulders, the slow sweep of his eyes, sent waves of tension and curiosity through the crowd. The officer's face betrayed the faintest hint of doubt, the first crack in his confidence. In that suspended moment, the airport was no longer just a terminal. It had become a theater, a stage where every silent observer played a part. And in the back of everyone's mind, a single question lingered. What happens next? Nobody expected what happened next. Someone whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Phones shook slightly in hands and eyes widened. The tension was now a living thing, wrapping itself around every person in the terminal, stretching every heartbeat. And all the while, Seagal remained still, calm, unyielding, the quiet center of a storm that everyone was helpless to resist watching. The silence in the terminal was absolute. Every whisper, every shuffle of feet, every faint click of a camera shutter seemed magnified. The officer's grip on Steven Seagal's collar hadn't changed, but the tension radiating from him was no longer just physical. It had become psychological. He was testing, probing, wondering whether this man was like any other he had confronted before. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the truth began to assert itself. Seagal remained utterly calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout or flinch. He simply stood there, a subtle smile playing across his face, eyes fixed on the officer with a quiet authority that demanded acknowledgement. The people around them leaned forward instinctively, sensing that the next few moments would decide everything. Phones were poised, hands slightly shaking, as if even holding a camera might disturb the delicate balance in the air. The officer pushed harder. His arm flexed. His jaw tightened. Beads of sweat began to form along his temple, visible under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the terminal. Yet Seagal's stance remained perfectly relaxed, his weight balanced evenly, his breathing steady. Every micro-movement, slight tilt of the head, subtle shift of the shoulders, exuded an energy that was calm but undeniably powerful. It was as though time itself slowed. The crowd's whispers faded into silence. Even the background hum of announcements and rolling luggage seemed distant, muted by the force of what was happening in the corridor. Eyes followed Seagal's every movement, every subtle gesture. And then, almost imperceptibly, a change occurred. The officer's arm wavered. A slight tremor, unnoticed by most, betrayed the realization that he had underestimated the man in front of him. Seagal's gaze didn't shift. He didn't need to make a single threatening motion. His calm presence alone communicated what words could not. He was in full control. The crowd, sensing the shift, leaned forward. Phones clicked and whirred, capturing the moment when authority was redefined, not through force but through measured composure. A hush spread through the terminal. Passengers who had been holding their breath exhaled slowly, almost collectively, as if releasing tension that had been stored in the air itself. The officer's shoulders sagged fractionally, his grip easing just enough for those watching to see the balance of power had shifted. No one had moved a finger, no punch had been thrown, no loud confrontation erupted. And yet, the message was unmistakable. The quiet, steady presence of one man had commanded respect without violence, without theatrics. Seagal finally allowed a slow, deliberate shift in stance, a movement so subtle it could have gone unnoticed if the crowd hadn't been watching so intently. The officer's expression transformed from defiance to recognition. A nod almost imperceptible, a flicker of surprise, then a faint, reluctant smile. He had understood something fundamental. Real strength was measured not in aggression, but in composure, patience, and control. Around them, murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people whispered, "Did you see that?" Others shook their heads as if to clear the disbelief from their minds. Even those holding phones lowered them slightly, taking a moment to simply witness the resolution without relying on screens. There was an almost reverential quality to the way everyone absorbed the scene, an acknowledgement that what had just happened was not ordinary, not scripted, but undeniably impressive. Seagal didn't gloat. He didn't shout victory or demand recognition. He simply straightened his coat, adjusted his bag lightly, and began walking past the officer as if nothing had happened. The officer stepped back, granting space, still processing the lesson delivered in silence. People instinctively parted, creating a path, not out of fear but out of respect for what they had just witnessed. Even the airport staff seemed changed. The security guard who had been leaning against the counter adjusted his posture, his own confidence subtly reinforced by observing a display of calm authority. Travelers returned to their paths, but their steps were lighter, their eyes more alert, carrying the unspoken understanding that they had witnessed something rare, a demonstration of quiet, assured strength that did not need to shout to be noticed. The whisper that had begun in the crowd earlier now carried more weight. Nobody expected what happened next, but the reality was even more compelling. It wasn't a sudden explosion of action or drama. It was a deliberate, understated victory, the kind that lingered in the mind long after the scene ended. Every observer felt it. Everyone understood it. Seagal's calm authority had resolved a tense standoff, not with aggression, but with presence, patience, and subtlety. In that brief moment, the terminal had witnessed a lesson in respect, power, and human observation. And for everyone who had watched, one question lingered quietly but insistently: how often in life do we underestimate quiet strength, only to learn that it speaks louder than words ever could? The airport had returned to its usual rhythm, but for anyone who had witnessed the standoff, the moment lingered in a way that words could scarcely capture. People continued to move, announcements resumed their steady cadence and luggage wheels rolled across the polished floor, but the quiet lesson left by Steven Seagal remained, invisible yet profoundly felt. It was a reminder that strength often doesn't announce itself with noise. True authority doesn't need to shout. In the chaos of everyday life, it's easy to equate loudness with power, whether at work, in relationships, or in social settings. But what had unfolded in that airport terminal illustrated something far more compelling. Calm, deliberate presence can shape situations in ways aggression never could. Think about the officer who had grabbed Seagal. On the surface, he seemed to hold the power, uniform, authority, and an immediate physical advantage. But power in its truest form isn't measured by force alone. It is measured by confidence, patience, and self-control. Seagal didn't need to raise his voice, throw a punch, or even frown. He simply existed fully in the moment, composed, aware, and ready. His quiet confidence shifted the balance without overt action. For the crowd, this was more than just a spectacle. It was a lesson they would carry with them far beyond the airport gates. The murmurs of disbelief, the instinctive leaning forward, the collective exhale when the tension resolved. These were all reflections of human recognition that quiet strength is powerful precisely because it is subtle. It doesn't demand attention, it earns it. We can see parallels in our own lives. How often do we encounter challenges or confrontations and feel the impulse to react immediately, loudly, or forcefully? Perhaps in an argument at work, a tense meeting, or a personal disagreement, we instinctively reach for the most obvious form of control: domination, volume, or speed. Yet, as in the terminal that day, patience and calm observation often lead to more meaningful outcomes. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who influences everything without being noticed. Even for those who weren't part of the immediate standoff, the travelers who resumed walking, the baristas who poured coffee, the children tugging at their parents' hands, the lesson was still accessible. Strength isn't always visible. Influence isn't always loud. Respect doesn't always announce itself. Often, the most impactful moments are those that unfold subtly, almost imperceptibly, leaving observers with a feeling of awe and reflection rather than shock or fear. Consider the small, everyday decisions we make. A calm response to an angry email, a patient approach to a difficult conversation, the decision to listen rather than interrupt. These are the echoes of the quiet authority Seagal demonstrated. They may not make headlines, but they change outcomes in ways that aggression cannot. Just as the officer had learned, power often lies in the restraint we show, the composure we maintain, and the awareness with which we navigate each interaction. Even beyond professional or social settings, the lesson resonates personally. Life is full of moments where we are tested, not by physical confrontation but by pressure, stress, and expectation. It could be a difficult family conversation, an unexpected challenge at work, or a moment when someone tries to intimidate us. In each case, the lesson from that airport terminal applies. Calm strength, patient observation, and measured response can not only resolve situations, but also command respect in a way that force never could. And perhaps the most profound part is this: the effect of quiet strength is often magnified by the reactions of others. When we act with composed authority, the people around us notice, even if only subtly. Their responses, whether admiration, respect, or cautious observation, create a ripple effect. Just like the crowd at the terminal, everyone witnessing our composed presence begins to sense the influence of steady, quiet strength. So, what does this mean for us? It means that life doesn't always require loud, dramatic action. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is exist fully in the moment, stay calm, and let our presence speak louder than our words. It is a reminder that respect is earned through composure, patience, and awareness, and that these qualities are far more enduring than aggression or noise. The next time you face a challenge, a confrontation, or a tense moment, remember the airport terminal. Remember the people holding their breath, the phones raised, the silent lesson being observed. And remember that real power often lies in the quiet confidence to stand, unshaken, in the middle of chaos, and influence everything around you without ever raising your voice. The terminal had slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Travelers resumed their hurried pace, luggage wheels rolled across the polished floors, and overhead announcements continued their steady hum. But for those who had witnessed the confrontation between Steven Seagal and the officer, nothing would feel ordinary ever again. That moment, the tension, the calm, the subtle power dynamics, lingered in the mind, a quiet echo that refused to fade. It's easy to walk past a moment like that without thinking. Airports are busy, life is busy, and we often don't pause long enough to notice the lessons quietly being taught right in front of us. Yet, if you truly reflect on what happened, it becomes clear. Power isn't always about force. Influence isn't always about loudness. Real authority comes from patience, composure, and the quiet ability to command respect without making a scene. Think back to the officer whose uniform, stature, and immediate action suggested dominance. On paper, he had every advantage. But it wasn't his size, nor his position, nor the physical control he exerted that ultimately mattered. It was Seagal's presence, his calm awareness, and his unwavering confidence that shifted the balance in an instant. The lesson here isn't just about airport confrontations. It's about life itself. Every day we encounter situations where we feel pressure to react loudly or immediately, whether in arguments, in stressful work meetings, or even in casual social interactions. But as Seagal demonstrated, the most effective responses often come not from force or noise, but from restraint, observation, and measured action. The quiet person who remains composed under pressure is often the one who achieves the most influence, earns the most respect, and leaves the most lasting impression. And this lesson doesn't just stay in the airport or the story. It's something you can carry into your own life. Imagine the next time someone tries to provoke you. Imagine handling tension calmly, observing carefully, and responding only when necessary. Imagine how much more powerful that approach could be compared to reacting immediately in anger, frustration, or panic. That's the subtle strength Seagal revealed, and that's the power we can all learn from. Now let's bring this back to you, the viewer. How often do you pause in moments of tension and simply assess the situation before acting? How often do you allow your presence, your composure, and your patience to speak louder than words? Take a moment to reflect. In your life, where could you benefit from adopting this quiet, steady authority? It might be at work, at home, with friends, or even in casual daily interactions where small choices matter more than you realize. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Seagal's shoes? Would you have reacted calmly like him, or would you have let the tension get the better of you? Comment below because we're all curious to hear how different people respond to moments of pressure, and your reflection could inspire someone else watching right now. And while you're reflecting, don't forget the power of observation itself. In the terminal, every person was watching closely, the onlookers, the staff, the travelers passing by. They were part of the story even though they didn't intervene. In your life, paying attention, noticing subtle cues, and being aware of dynamics around you can give you insight and influence that no forceful action ever could. So take a moment, notice more, react less, and let the quiet power within you guide your actions. If you've ever found yourself in a tense situation and wished you could handle it with composure, type respect in the comments. Let's see how many people value calm strength over loud force. And while you're doing that, hit the like button if you believe that subtle, quiet authority is the true measure of power. Every like, every comment, every share helps this lesson reach someone who needs it. Someone who might be facing their own standoff in life, and who could benefit from seeing that calm strength wins more often than aggression ever does. Finally, remember that life is full of small standoffs, not just dramatic ones. The airport scene is an extreme example, but its lesson applies everywhere. In the office, in relationships, in casual interactions, even in moments when no one else is watching. Quiet confidence, patience, and measured presence are tools you can carry with you every day. The more you practice them, the more natural they become, and the more influence you quietly command over the situations around you. So, as you continue your day, pause for a moment and ask yourself, when I face tension, when I face someone trying to test me, when I feel pressure mounting, how can I respond with calm, steady authority rather than reactive force? Think about that. Reflect on it. And if you want to keep learning from stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a lesson that combines suspense, intrigue, and life wisdom. Because at the end of the day, it's not the loudest person in the room who wins. It's the one who stands calm, observes, and lets quiet strength do the talking. And that, more than anything, is the lesson Steven Seagal gave to everyone watching that day.